What's all gone quiet? Wow. For those of you watching on Zoom, actually, would you just mind muting yourselves? Just so we don't get any random interruptions like telephone calls. It's very strange, this, doing it in live. I've got, for those of you that are missing out because you're all watching it, there's about 76 or so people here. Well, minus 70. I'm good. Michael Kaplan has joined us on the Zoom, which is important because for this particular shiur, for this discussion we're going to have today, it was very important that I spoke to my advisor, advisor for many people. David, I know usually we do talk about things, but this time I went to Michael Kaplan for all the obvious reasons, who helped me tremendously to understand a little bit. And I've learned so much in the last few days preparing for this shiur. But I'll explain what I want. The source sheets. In fact, I need to put the source sheets in the on the chat. I've decided not to go crazy with sources for this one because I want to have a bit more of a discussion and not get bogged down in the words so much. But it's important to start us off with a few of the sources. So I'm going to put it into the chat for those of you that are watching. And please, I apologize, but there's actually Seamus. I didn't realize I put the name of God in it. So if you do print it out at home, please bury it or give it to me. And if it's here, then get rid of this, please. Why can't I get rid of this? 1 second, I apologize. Why can't I get rid of this? Chat. There we go. Right. Okay, so firstly, this shiur is dedicated in loving memory of Shalom ben Noach Halevi. His yortzeit is actually at the beginning of next week, but it happens to be a son of a member of ours, someone I knew very well, who died very tragically. So this is going to be b'shem in his honor, in his name. Be'ezrat Hashem, all the limud haTorah, all our learning today should be for a bracha for him and his family. I want to start with a story. Actually, the story is attributed to Reb Chaim of Brisk. So we're going back. I mean, Reb Chaim, I think he died the last year of the First World War. And Reb Chaim of Brisk, just if we could just keep silence. Just keep yourselves muted if that's okay, everyone. It's just, I'm not sitting by the computer. So even if you can mute, that'd be great. Thanks. Huh? Yeah, but I won't be. I have. Yeah, it's okay. We're all fine. So this Chaim of Brisk, the following story. I heard it this year for the first time, and I was blown away. It's not specifically our topic, but I bought it. I bring it for a reason. It was Erev Rav Chaim was. I mean, we're going back to sort of the Rav Soloveitchik era, but his great-grandfather, I think it was, or his grandfather, Rav Soloveitchik's grandfather. So an immense personality and formed so much of sort of the halachic systems and the culture that we have today. And the story is told of Chaim of Brisk that it was a couple of hours before Kol Nidre night in Yom Kippur. And word got to him that in another town, there was a young boy that had been taken by the authorities. Unlike today, I mean, he could have done something that was mildly inappropriate, but in those towns, in those times, we're going back to the late 1900s, so we can imagine 1800s. Sorry, we're going back to a time where things were very unsafe in an area of where, you know, in Poland, where things are very, very unsafe, and so it became a very serious situation. It got to Reb Chaim, what do we do? It's nearly Kol Nidre. So Reb Chaim gathered everyone and sent messages out to all the shuls. When people were to come to shul on Kol Nidre, they had to leave shul immediately on Yom Kippur, go home, find whatever money they could find, bring it back to shul on Kol Nidre, and take a collection to basically bribe the authorities to release this boy. And he sent it all the way to the town. That night, Rab Chaim himself went with his aides to all the communities, all the shuls, collecting the money. This is Kol Nidre night, right? You can imagine. He went around collecting all the money. And the following morning, he got on a train. He went to, just please silence everyone. Thank you very much. He went to basically release this boy. And there's an idea, right, that we cannot let, we're going to see now, we cannot allow ourselves to be caught up in a situation where our lives are at risk with authorities that have the ability to really harm and cause us harm. It's a story that needs a lot of explanation to understand all the pratim, all the details. But I thought it was an interesting, firstly, just to think about what we're talking about on Yom Kippur, getting on a train and going. But we go to many lengths of pikuach nefesh to save a person's life. And much of the more serious side of the Jewish system is potentially pikuach nefesh in terms of really saving souls and looking at the ideas behind who has the right to be defended, why and how. And what I want to come on to in the second part, there's two parts to this. Number one is understanding our relationship as a halachic Jewish society with the secular court system, how that works, how the two shall meet. Right? We're living in England, and sometimes, if the police knock on your door and drag you down to whatever it is, we haven't got a choice, we have to go for all the right or the wrong reasons. But what does halacha have to say about that? Because it's very important we understand that. That's the first part. And the second part is I want to get on to having a discussion around what are the halachic, ethical, moral, legal implications of defending those that commit crimes. And I think that's I've had a fascinating look at some of this stuff, and maybe we can have a little discussion around it. So I put in the chat the source sheets if you want to follow along. Not going to do too many of the sources, but we need to start at the very beginning. There's a law called arkos, or if you want, arkot. It's not something that's discussed very much. It comes from the parasha of Mishpatim. And if we look at the first source, we're told, just after the revelation at Sinai, beginning of Mishpatim, Ve'ela ha-Mishpatim, these are the laws, asher tasim lifneihem, that are set, that you will bring to or set in place of lifneihem, before them. These are the laws, and we're going to get the parasha of Mishpatim goes through loads and loads of laws, mostly civil laws, so monetary stuff and things like that. These are laws that you place before them. Who are them? The judges. Before the judges, right? These are the laws that if you have a dispute, you will come before the judges. That's how we understand that. If you jump to source 3, actually, we have an obligation. It comes much later in the beginning of Parashat Shoftim, which is in the middle of the book of Devarim. You have to set up yourself courts, judges, police system. So we have an obligation to set up a policing and court system with policing, with authorities. And then we also have this idea that when we have all these mishpatim, when we have all these rulings, all these laws that we have to keep, that when there's a dispute, we have to bring them before the judges. Says Rashi in source number 2, something critical. He says, V'lo lifnei goyim, lifneihem, before judges, but not before non-Jews. So all of a sudden, we have a law, and this is a mitzvah d'oraisa. This is a mitzvah, a command from the Torah. When you have a Jewish legal dispute, it is asur. One is prohibited to bring that before goyim, non-Jews. I don't mean a goy. I don't mean like in a nasty way. We're talking about the non-Jewish court system. Now, why would that be? Why would it be asur? Why would it be prohibited? Oh, good. Says Rab David that civil law might be in conflict with halacha because we have this parasha of Mishpatim. And parasha of Mishpatim is going to say, if your ox, gores his ox, you have to pay this and you have to do that. Or if someone... So it's set out. Halacha set it out. So if you go to a non-Jewish court, possibly the civil or secular authority are going to say something totally different, which is going to contradict halacha, and we're bound by halacha. That would make sense. Except the fact, if we read the Rashi, I'll read it in English. It says, so you should bring these laws to the Jewish courts, to the judges, not the non-Jews, or the heathens, as this says, even if you know that in the case of a particular matter of law, they, the non-Jewish courts, will decide it in the same way as a Jewish law would, still do not bring it before non-Jewish courts. So David gave the good answer. Why have to bring it before Jewish courts? Because it's halacha, because it might contradict halacha. But says Rashi, and his understanding comes from the Gemara, all the oral law, that even if you know that it's going to be adjudicated and decided, and it will be the same in secular courts as it will be in halachic matters, still one should not bring it to non-Jewish courts. So then I ask you again, why? So Rashi says, Rashi gives us go on, David. Oh, so says David that potentially what we're worried about is, in this case, it doesn't contradict halacha. But once we get into a society where there's an atiyah, there's a natural inkling to go to a secular court, at some point there's going to be a contradiction, and we don't want to. So that's a good answer. Simon, I feel like you're going to.
Well, I think just being the natural cynical individual, you don't wash your dirty in public.
Oh, so says Simon Hildebrand. I'm saying your surname just because not everyone can see who I'm talking to. I could just make up names. Yeah, it says Simon Hildebrand that we don't wash our dirty laundry in public. And what's it got to do with the outside communities? If I'm not going to be too political or and say anything too bad about maybe some of our local papers and stuff that like to air very much our dirty laundry in the public, but what's it going to do with everyone else knowing our business? If two Jews, if Moshe and Chaim don't get on, so let Moshe and Chaim deal with it within our courts. Why does it have to be aired out there? So that's very good. So that's not what Rashi says. Rashi says, so you should even if you know that this case of particular matter in law that they will decide in the same way as Jewish law, still do not bring to their courts. For he who brings Israel's law cases before the non-Jews defames the name of the Lord and pays honor to the name of the idol in the name of which the heathen court administers justice. Meaning, what does Rashi say? We have a legal system with halacha, bound by halacha, bound by Torah, bound by God. God says this is the law in this case, and therefore this is what we do. Where's secular law based? He's saying it's not even secular law. He's saying it's built by other beliefs, i.e. not God. Therefore, we cannot be seen to be doing things based on a system of other gods. That's what he says. Okay, not everyone agrees with this, Rashi, but that's his reasoning. Meaning, we have to understand the reasoning of our case. Our case is non-Jewish courts. What's the prohibition? Says Rashi. It's because you're a kofar. You denying gods by putting your life and your own living in the hands of another god. That's based, briefly on what Rashi's saying. Maimonides Rambam in source number 4 says it's slightly different. I'll read it in English. When any person has a judgment adjudicated by Gentile judges and their courts, he is considered a rasha, a wicked person. If your Jewish neighbor and you have a dispute over the fence, by the way, we're going to Jewish neighbor, right? No, if you're Jewish neighbor, right? We can't. What's it? If you and your Jewish neighbor have an issue with a table tennis table, whatever it is, right? Says you're evil by taking it to the non-Jewish courts. Why? It is as if he disgraced, blasphemed, and lifted up his hand against the Torah of Moses, our teacher. This applies even if their laws are the same as the laws of the Jewish people. As our pasuk, it brings the verse that you have to take our laws before our judges. Now, before I carry on, so really there's a couple of reasons for this din of our case, the fact that we can't go to non-Jewish courts. Either we're glorifying or following potentially other legal systems that are not our gods. There are different gods or different systems, or simply we're just going against Moshe Rabbeinu and the Torah. Like we've got a system to live by, so we have to live by it. We can't go and live by their systems. Right now, the Rambam says something very interesting. So the following procedures should be carried out if the Gentiles have a powerful law enforcement system and the opposing litigant is a stubborn and powerful person for whom one cannot expropriate property through the judicial system of the Jewish people. Meaning, what's he saying? Okay, Reuven and Shimon have a dispute over a cow, whatever it is, right? And Reuven says, right, we're going to Beth Din. Shimon says, I'm not going to Beth Din. Who are you? Leave me alone. So, what do? We have a law that says you have to go to Beth Din. Shimon's refusing to go to Beth Din. So says the Rambam, if now there's an authority out there, i.e. secular law, what Reuven can then do is he can go to a lawyer. He's tried Beth Din. Beth Din isn't working, and we can't force him to come to Beth Din. Some of the Botei Dinim have ways and means to try and encourage, but practically speaking, they can't really do much. They have no legal authority outside of their own court system, right? So therefore, it says one should summon him before the Jewish judges first. And if he did not desire to come, one may receive a license from the court and salvage one's property from the litigant by having the case tried in a non-Jewish court. So even though we have an issur, a prohibition of our case, of taking a Jewish matter to a non-Jewish court, this applies when we have two Jewish parties, and it only applies to a case where the case where both parties agree to go to the non-Jewish, or they both did. You can't get them both to agree to go to the Beth Din. But it's very important. If you have an issue with a Jewish neighbor, it's less relevant here specifically because we live in our wonderful community of Belmont, where not necessarily your neighbor, if you've got like things going on, but it could be in business or whatever it might be. You should go to Beth Din, and the Dayanim aren't there just to hatch, match, and dispatch. They don't just look at the yichus and worry about all the weddings, and worry about all the gittin and all the gerus and that kind of stuff. What they do a lot of the time is sit in dinei mamonos. They sit in courts listening to the cases between Jewish parties. Now we could give a whole series, and maybe we'll do another time, about how a Beth Din works, how you can bring other boti din together. If I get a summons from a Beth Din that I've never heard of, do I have to go to that Beth Din? Can I demand my own dayan, my own judge from my own Beth Din to go and there's plenty of different things, but I'm overly simplifying it just so we understand what is happening here. Now, so you know what, let's leave, I'm conscious of time, let's leave the next couple of sources. Basically, we learn from the next couple of sources, really there's a din here that if you won't, as I said, if you won't come to Beth Din, you have the right, says the Rambam, and says the Gemara here, and this is how we paskin in source number 6, we rule that if you need to go through a dispute through a Beth Din and the other party won't come to a Beth Din, you can go to a non-Jewish court. Similarly, if you are summoned to a non-Jewish court, you have to go because you haven't got a choice, because we have a legal system in this country and we have to be law-abiding citizens, which I'm going to come to in a moment. So that's the first part of this. There is a din, or there is halacha of our case, of understanding for whether it's because we don't want to air our dirty laundry, or whether it's because we don't want to contradict Torah law, or taking it more serious, Rashi does, as the Rambam does, because simply we could be seen as denying Torah law by going to another court system. Whatever it might be, we have a serious issur, prohibition, not to take our Jewish disputes to non-Jewish courts. Last one on that is, what if you have, I apologize, the job of the nice Jewish boy or girl? What's the job of the nice Jewish boy or girl? One of two. One of three. Doctor, lawyer, accountant, right? Not a rabbi. I'll have you know, no one says that's the job for the nice Jewish boy. So let's say you're a lawyer, Jewish lawyer, and you work in a firm, and you have a client, and let's say that client's Jewish, and you get to court for whatever the civil dispute is, and you realize that the other party is also Jewish. So now you have two Jews in a non-Jewish court going against this halacha, and you are representing one side. Are you allowed to represent your client? What do you say?
Yes.
Yes. Why?
Because everybody has a right to be heard. And I agree with that.
Okay, everyone has a right to be heard, but what's the issue now? I am enabling two Jews to potentially break halacha. Let's assume that the Beth Din have not agreed to this, because we said if the Beth Din agrees to it because one party won't come, it's mutar, it's allowed. Let's assume that hasn't happened. Two Jews, they have both decided. Let's say they both know that you shouldn't come to this, but they don't care. They both decided we're going to deal with this in a court. Are you allowed to help them break halacha?
No.
David says no. Simon says
Yes.
Simon says yes. Why does David say no? Why does Simon say yes? No, you started.
I think that if he has not established that they have not agreed to go to the Beth Din, he's not prohibiting the person from being defended. All he's doing is saying, I will not act on your behalf because you have not followed the law. I mean, we're assuming.
So you're saying he can't?
He can't,
Yeah.
He's not allowed to represent him.
He can't represent him because he's breaking halacha.
Because he's breaking law, because he knows that they have not court.
Because they haven't been to the Beth Din. I'm repeating what you're saying because people might not be able to hear you. Fine. So David says, Pasha, no, breaking halacha. Simon says, yes, you can, because
2 reasons.
2 reasons.
First off, and to quote your third source, they shall govern the people who love justice.
Yeah.
So in order to get justice, you have to be properly represented.
So Simon's saying in order to get justice, you have to be properly represented. But can you break halacha? Or can you enable them to break halacha?
You then have the other halacha.
The other halacha?
Yes. Well, think about the show this morning. After the half Torah,
Yeah.
what prayer do we say?
Prayer for the royal family.
Thank you.
Right?
We are taught to give due deference.
Okay.
to
So says Simon, we're taught to give due deference to the government. One second. I'm not disagreeing with that. We'll come on to that. We are going to mention that. Go on.
First one, if somebody else can take over, non-Jew can take over and represent them.
Oh, another Jew, you're saying?
No, non-Jew.
A non-Jew, right. So that's the argument to Simon. No one is saying that we have to deny their right to be heard in a civil court. What we're saying is the Jewish lawyer potentially is enabling those 2 Jews to break halacha.
No,
So
but he's not.
why is he not?
Why is he not? Because
He's there defending them and allowing this person to have a case.
they will go to court in any event.
Oh, right. Oh, and that's the answer. Right. So Simon's hit the nail on the head. The potential concern, the chashash, if we want to use like a yeshiva language, the worry here. By the way, anyone who's awake and watching on the Zoom, feel free to also shout out and wave at me or unmute yourself to throw in. I'm not ignoring you. I'm trying to keep a 7th eye here. But anyone that goes to court and has this Jewish lawyer, the worry is, the chashash is, maybe by enabling, you are putting a stumbling block in front of the blind. What does that mean? We discussed this a lot last week, or 2 weeks ago. We are essentially, by allowing them to do this, by defending one or representing one, let's just say, not defending, representing one party, you are enabling. You're putting a stumbling block in front of the blind. This is halacha, you can't do it, and therefore you're allowing them to break halacha. That's the only major concern, because essentially you yourself are not doing something wrong. They have brought this to court, you're doing your job. You're doing a job. You have a client that you need to represent. They're doing the thing wrong. So the sort that the authorities say, based on what we discussed 2 weeks ago, is that when there's plenty of alternatives and you happen just to be doing your job and you're just one and they're going to go definitely to someone else, it's mutar, it's allowed. So any of you that have sons, daughters, cousins, nephews, nieces who are Jewish lawyers, don't worry, we're okay. It's still fine. Okay, so that's but it's an interesting to see why, and nothing should be a given. Everything we're discussing today, there's a purpose for discussing it because it's been thought about, and we have to understand why it should be allowed. Now, everyone here is talking about dinner, the mechuta dinner, the mechuta dinner. The law of the land is the law. So let's give a good example, right? Where does this apply? I was thinking about what's a good example. I thought about parking restrictions. So when there are times where halacha and civil law will meet, and where is there a problem with that? Well, what do you do? So when it comes to standard civil cases, I have an issue with him or her, whatever it is, and we can go to a Beth Din, and Beth Din can deal with the dispute, fine. If for whatever reason it hasn't gone to a Beth Din, it's gone to a court, fine. But where there's a case where halacha doesn't have an opinion, right? So parking restrictions. According to halacha, if I park in a bay that is marked a residence parking only, and I'm not a resident, I don't have a jipchuk, I don't have a ticket parking permit, thank you. I don't have a permit. Can I park there? According to halacha. David said in Golders Green, yes. yeah, not even double parking, three deep. According to halacha, can I park in a bay that's marked residents only, and I'm not a resident? Says Graham, yes. Why? Someone has decided that the authorities have decided, we've decided you're not allowed to park there. We're going to fine you, right? So according to halacha, can I park there?
You can park there, but you have to pay the fine.
Okay, well, okay. I have no argument. All right, yeah, go on.
In certain situations, the law of the land priority. You have to respect
But why? Why does the law of the land bind me in halacha? Maybe it just binds me in the law of the land.
No, somewhere.
I'm feeding you because I'm going to give you the answer in a second.
Okay.
Oh, go on, David.
There's two extras. One is Laka has got absolutely nothing to say about it.
So David says, on one opinion, halakha has nothing to say, which is what I was trying. That's why I thought parking restrictions. Nowhere in the Gemara did I find anything about parking restrictions. Brent, Barnet, I'm sure it exists somewhere. Your donkey's parked outside the tavern of your neighbor, and the tavern neighbor says you can't park there, right? So there's no halakha on this area.
Underlying the issue about we should have courts and so on is that without law, society will fall apart and it's extremely dangerous.
Okay, so David's saying without law, society will fall apart. It's extremely dangerous, which is what that pasuk that we saw in Parashat Shoftim says. You have to have courts, and you have to have police, and you have to have officers, and you have to have all these things. So therefore, put that all together, and you're saying
the risk of civil breakdown and attack on Jews because you are flouting
you're right.
civil law.
Right, so flouting civil law puts us at risk. So I'm going to take it one step further. That the principle of dinner d'mechuta dinner, again, this is a very complicated topic, is essentially the law of the land is the law, meaning halacha obligates us in a civil law that's nothing to do with halacha. So parking restrictions might be a bad idea, you're right, because I'll just get a fine. Anyone can park anywhere. You can just get towed or a fine or whatever it might be. But when there's a civil law, when there's a societal law that has no mention of halacha doesn't have an opinion about it, if that's the law, and it doesn't contradict halacha, if that's the law of the land, that becomes part of the halachic framework of society. Where I was thinking about the COVID restrictions, right? If the law says you have to wear a mask, that becomes halacha, whether we like it or not. And that was one of my arguments to certain colleagues, and not, I don't know ones, we won't go down there, but going back 18 months ago, like, what are you doing? Like, this is halacha now. This is, forget even b'koach nefesh, this is halacha, it's for sure b'koach nefesh. And that's a very important part of this system, because we can't deny the fact that we live in a secular society. It's a fascinating discussion, by the way, in Israel. Because if you get called to a secular court in Israel, it's as if it's a secular court here, because a secular court in Israel is not bound by halacha either. Only thing that's bound by halacha is a beth din. That's almost part one over. The only other topic here is oath taking. Right? When I go to court, Michael, in a civil court, do you take an oath?
Yeah, anyone giving evidence is expected to take an oath to tell the truth.
In any court.
Well, that's the position, but I mean there is a live debate as to is that really necessary. But also when people make a statement in civil proceedings, it contains a declaration, it's a statement of truth. And in criminal proceedings, that if they say anything which is not true, they could be prosecuted. But
Right.
there is a live debate, is that outdated?
Oh, okay. So maybe we'll come back. Thank you very much for that, Michael. Were you on at the beginning when I thanked you for all your help and advice?
No, I wasn't. Could you just repeat that again then? No, I was.
Thank you for all your help and advice. Apparently you can't be a lawyer because you've got a sense of humor. So I was interested by this because it's something that we didn't talk about it when we had our conversation, but I think I was talking about it with my father actually earlier in the week, who's a magistrate. So we were having a conversation about this the other day. So I went on to the Ministry of Defense and I printed out their oaths and affirmations language and all the directives here. And it says that the person taking the oath shall hold the New Testament, or if a Jew, the Old Testament, in his uplifted hand, and shall say or repeat after the person administrating it the oath provided in part 2. What's the oath? And every different, which one's lay members, one's persons in attendance for instructions, one's witnesses, interpreters, whatever it is, they all start with, I swear by Almighty God. So if I put my hand on the Old Testament, let's say it's a legit one, Art Scroll, or Hertz, or whatever you want, the Gutnik. If I take a Chumash and I put my hand on it and say, I swear by the Almighty God, am I allowed to do that? No, why not? Pardon? We don't deny oaths on college, right? We nullify our oaths because we shouldn't be making them, right? We are not allowed to make an oath in the name of God. Really, we can't do it at all. But oh, okay. So there's an option 4, okay, which says, I, Mark Levine, do solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. In America, don't they say, so help me God, right? Which defeats the purpose of affirming. Okay, whatever it is. But I just thought I would bring it because it's relevant to our court discussion, that even if they were to bring you an Old Testament, it doesn't help because you still shouldn't be making an oath in that way. And I think maybe part of the discussion that Michael was saying is, I mean, me saying this is all very well, but if I'm going to lie, I'm going to lie. So saying this is not. I'm assuming that's a part of the conversation, as you say, is the live debate in that, Michael. Meaning, there's a whole idea.
Yes, and how people should take the oath. And although don't want to sidetrack you, but there was a case, and I was told about it, where someone wanted to take the oath wearing his tefillin and came before a very orthodox judge who took one view, but discussed it then with that judge's non-Jewish colleagues at lunchtime, and they took a very different view. Interesting.
Wow. I'd be interested to look into that. Again, I want to keep on
No,
talking
it's
for them.
a side view, but all these things are real issues.
Yeah, for sure, which is why your presence here is essential. And I could not have put this together properly without you. So that was the first part. Second part, when we get into the meat and potatoes, is criminal law, right? So now, again, we've said that dinner d'mechuta dinner. We're talking about when we live in a secular society, we have to follow their laws. I'm not talking about that. There's 3 areas that we could cover here. Very briefly, we're just going to mention them. Being a witness, being a prosecutor, and then being a lawyer that represents and defends criminals. They're the 3 areas that I've kind of thought about when it comes to this. Being a witness, a prosecutor, and representing criminals. And I called this, can a person represent a knowing criminal? As in, so in order to understand this, I'm going to just put together sort of being a witness and a prosecutor. Can a Jew be a witness? And I'm asking it obviously because it's not simple. Can a Jew be a witness against another Jew? Would there be any issue of that?
In a civil court.
We're not talking, the Beth Din as we live in today do not have authority over criminal proceedings. They don't, I mean, we can get advice, but essentially there's no authority here, right? We're not living in a society that is only bound by halacha. So we have to rely on the secular courts. There is a criminal case now. Can a Jew be a witness against another Jew?
Yes.
Yes, everyone's happy with that? Okay, except you're missing one halacha.
No, on the way, if you look at the court system within the Trump's intercessor, you have to have 2 witnesses to confirm that somebody.
Yeah, but that's halacha. We're not talking about halacha now.
No, we're talking about the principle of bearing witness.
Okay, so says Simon, there is a principle of bearing witness. Now, go on.
But if this is where halakha and
Just speak up a bit, just in case it picks it up.
halakha and criminal law, British
Civil,
civil criminal law,
Secular law.
yeah, will be divergent because if you stand up as a witness and the accused is convicted on the testimony or on your testimony, which is one witness,
Yeah.
then that may, if you were in a Beth Din,
Yeah.
you brought that testimony,
It wouldn't be valid,
convicted
right.
because it wouldn't be-
But okay, so what Graham's saying is, according to halacha, in many cases you need Eidim, 2 witnesses, and here you're acting as potentially only 1 witness. So that's already contradicting halacha. I'm not worried about that. It's a good point. I don't know. First, there are some cases in the Beth Din that you can rely on 1, even though generally, if it's not for the big stuff, we don't. But let's say I'm not worried about that, because that's on their cheshbon. That's on the civil secular society deciding how many witnesses to take. But I am there giving so what I'll give you what the halachic issue is. There is a halachic issue prohibition called Masira. All right. This came out in a big way, and we're not going through this today, or when it came to a lot of the reporting child abuse, right? Within the Jewish community. You can't report on people in that who are like that because of Masira. What's Masira? to be moser, to be masar, to pass over a Jew to a non-Jew. That is against halacha. And I'll quote you from the source sheet. You don't have to look. It's only in the Hebrew, source number 7. And I did that, whatever. Source number 7. It's from the Shulchan Aruch. Asol limsor li Yisrael biyad akum. It is prohibited for a Jew to pass over another Jew to the secular courts. Bein begufa, bein b'mamona. Whether that's to do with a monetary case, whether it's physically that person. But afilu haya rasha ubal aveirot. Even if that Jew is an evil person, it is asur to pass him over to the non-Jewish courts or policing. Even if he's caused great pain. And anyone that does this, they have no portion in the world to come. Very strong language for the Shulchan Aruch. Now we're living in a different era, right? And that's why I brought the Reb Chaim story at the beginning. There are authorities that would take a Jew and not give him the proper treatment, or her, the proper treatment, that would potentially kill them, would not give them a proper legal system or everything like that. So there was an idea of not passing a Jew over to a non-Jewish system because potentially you are ending their life, whether they've done the biggest Aveira or not. Again, we have to get out of the mentality of today. We have to go back a few hundred years to think about how they lived and how they, the Tsar was out to get them. If they were walking on the street in a bad way in a different neighborhood or even in their own neighborhood, they could be attacked or beaten, whatever it might be. Many, many complicated factors here. But we're stuck now with this halacha called Nasira, which says specifically, specifically that you can't do it. Okay, you are evil. You lose your portion in the world to come if you do such a thing. So we have this halacha. So they understand this halacha to mean only in a case where you're passing them over to an authority that is unjust, that do not work properly with ethics and morals. So most, if not, I'm rather than say all, most mainstream, right-wing mainstream as well, halachic authorities, religious authorities today hold that if a criminal is a criminal is a criminal, right? Regardless, you need to report, you need to bear witness when it comes to the serious stuff, or any stuff. If a person's breaking the law, they're breaking the law. And we're bound by English law, that becomes part of halacha. Again, if it's complicated, I don't want to make too many generic, broad statements, but let's just keep this broad and generic for the moment. If there's someone that's committed a crime, we have an obligation to report that person, especially because our system, a Jew can go to prison and get kosher food and have a proper trial and be defended and have the right to be defended and have the right to all those things. We're not, okay, maybe there is a little bit of corruption in the system. I don't know, Michael, I don't know how the system works. Let's assume there's no corruption in the system. It all works perfectly. And a person that gets a part over to the authorities will have the right for a defense, have the right to be looked after properly, have the right to have the tefillin, all these things. So we're not worried about these things. So why shouldn't they go and pay for their crimes? But the reason why I brought it up is because it's not pashut. Can a Jew be a witness to a non-Jew, therefore enabling them to be given over or prosecuted by non-Jewish authorities? It's not pashut, it's not simple. In our society where we're happy that the court systems are being run appropriately, it's okay, because for everything I've just said. But I brought it because it's not simple. And the same goes for a prosecutor. If you have a Jewish prosecutor prosecuting another Jew, it would be allowed in the same way as a witness is allowed. Any questions? Make sense? Right, but it's important to know that this is halacha called Masira, that is a serious issue. So now we're left with really, can a Jew, or anyone for that matter, defend a known criminal? Someone that is guilty, or someone that is admitted. Let's just say you're a Jewish lawyer now, and you've got someone who is on trial for, let's not even make anything up. We can imagine what a bad thing would be. And, I've spoken myself to many criminal lawyers, defense lawyers who tell me the most horrendous stuff. I remember there was one lady that was telling me some of the things I said, years ago, I said, how can you defend this person, right? So is that allowed in halacha? Yes. Why?
Well, to use
So speak up a bit.
just use the adage, you are innocent. You may be a convicted criminal on something else, but on that particular crime, until it is proven you are guilty, you are innocent.
Right, so says Simon that even if you might be guilty of other crimes, on this particular crime, you are innocent until proven guilty, and therefore everyone has a right to be defended. Even if that person says, I did it to you, the lawyer. You now know this person committed the crime.
You know they've committed.
You know they've committed the crime. You can openly go to bat for them
Yes,
in court
because it is not proven.
because it's not proven. Okay, that's for Simon. Anyone have anything to say? Michael, you're not allowed to speak yet. Maybe later, but not yet. Anyone disagree with Simon? Everyone agrees.
I think that if there's no doubt, if the defendant actually admits it to his lawyer,
Mhm.
I mean, I'm not a defense
Yeah.
lawyer, but I believe that the defense lawyer has to withdraw from the case. I think.
Okay, so I had that question, right? I'm going to repeat Graham's question because I asked Michael earlier on in the week, and Michael, you'll tell me if I'm not presenting it appropriately. I asked Michael, I said, if your defendant, your client, admits to you, not publicly, but admits to you that they're guilty, are you in any obligation to then either report, to withdraw, whatever it might be? And Michael told me, no. He said that, and this is basically what Simon was saying, and this is at least even outside of halakha for the moment. This is just this is how our society looks at the law. It says, as you say, every person is innocent until proven guilty. I think there's a different terminology that's Michael was telling me is used today, but the every person that is accused of something, according to the law, it has to be proven. It has to be proved with evidence, and that's what the court case is all about. You or I or the lawyer has an obligation to ensure that person is tried in a court in a case where that evidence is proven. Because the only reason that they will be punished or prosecuted for that crime is if the evidence is proved. And if they can't prove the evidence, therefore, they don't have to do the time for the crime, if that makes sense. I hope I'm presenting it. Michael is much more articulate than I am, which means even if you know the person is guilty, you, the lawyer, have the obligation to ensure, that's your job, right? To ensure that they have a trial in which that the evidence proves what is being suggested or what is being what is reported to have been done. The crime that was committed. Now, what Michael did say to me, and he was very clear about it, as a lawyer, you are never allowed to mislead, right? That's what he told me. You're not allowed to mislead, and also not allowed to enter into a line of questioning that will mislead, because, you know, this is the law. Your job is to ensure every piece of evidence that is being brought against this person is proved to be accurate and appropriate. Therefore, that evidence will try that and potentially convict that person. And we had a discussion, and I know about cases where, you know, an undated document that our defense was resting on, if it's not dated, it can't be submitted. And therefore, even if it's true and it really happened, if it wasn't dated, it's inadmissible. And therefore, you can't prove it. And therefore, maybe this person gets off. But that's how that's how the system of law works. That's how it works civilly. That's how it works in the system here. A person can be a lawyer, can defend a known criminal, but is that ethically allowed? Is that moral? Someone tells you they did the most horrendous crime and they admitted it. Not, by the way, if they admit it in the court, that's up to them, right? There's no trial, I imagine. I can't remember what Michael, you know, but Michael said that there's always an argument to say, even if you want to go and say you're guilty, just say no, not guilty, because let's have a trial and let them prove it, because the onus is on them to prove it. But is there no moral obligation to say, like, what am I doing here? Oh, okay. So Michael says a lawyer can withdraw in case, but then I probably won't imagine that you'll do that well with future clients if you're going to start withdrawing yourself every time. You don't like.
No, not criminal witness to do it.
Okay.
Is there not an accusation made, particularly against American lawyers, as to morals and lawyers? Two things don't mix.
Simon's just discussing about how morals and lawyers don't mix. Moving on. I'm not going there. Yes.
Over here, you see, terrible crimes committed on these days. Terrible. And if they get caught, they get defended.
Yeah.
They have to get defended.
They have to be defended.
They're not just, if they plead innocent, we have to have a defense case, we have to have the representation to see that justice is done.
Right.
That's what it's all about.
That's how the system works.
That's the system.
But is it right?
Well, it's the system.
Barbara and David.
We choose to live in this system.
Okay, right, we choose to live in it.
We go somewhere else. This system doesn't work.
Okay.
And we have no right to hold.
We end up being,
Somebody gets chucked in jail for everything.
okay, Barbara.
Yeah, it must be really hard, it's the job.
Right, and but is it morally right? That's what I'm asking.
I thought, at least in American courts,
Speak up.
I thought, at least in American courts, the advice to lawyers is that they should not ask their clients if they're guilty or not.
No, of course.
Say that again.
No.
You should not ask.
You shouldn't ask if they.
You shouldn't ask your
There's
client.
there's a conversation about whether you should ask your client if they're guilty or not, right?
So that you can defend.
So that you can defend them, but that's more of probably a moral thing than a legal thing,
Yeah.
right? Again, the burden of proof is on the prosecution. And the job of the criminal defense lawyer, I mean, this might be very obvious to some of you, but it's not stuff I thought about specifically in a legal perspective. And it's something that I've had a journey with in the last few days, especially trying to understand how this all fits in. Because halacha, what does halacha say? Fascinating. I read an article from Herschel Schachter, the Rosh Yeshiva Yeshiva University, who literally word for word said what Michael said to me, that civil law and Jewish law are exactly aligned when it comes to this. A person has the right to a fair trial. Now, you can't lie, you can't mislead, literally the same words that Michael used. You can't lie, you can't mislead, but as a Jewish lawyer, because we're looking now from a halakhic perspective, you have the right to defend that person that justice prevails. When I say, or at least the judicial system prevails. And therefore, that person has the right to a fair hearing of which every single piece of evidence has to be proved. But I had a question, right? So Michael said to me, and this is where halakha would agree with it. Michael said to me that he advises everyone. Again, please stop me if I'm saying something you didn't say. Michael said that not he advised everyone. The advice that is given to defendants is plead not guilty, because then the onus is on them to prove that you did it. The problem then becomes in halakha, if I did it, can I still plead not guilty? Why would that be a problem? I'm lying. If I did it and I go to court, knowing the law that they have to prove it, the only way I can get to that trial is by saying the words not guilty. Or I think actually Michael said that if you don't, I don't want to quote what you said, I can't remember what you said or I read. But did you hear the problem now? Okay. If you don't have a halakhic system, you don't mind saying words that aren't true, say them, but we hold our words very true. Can you go into the court to say not guilty if you did it? Anyone feel free to.
Well, not guilty means that I don't think that there is enough evidence to convict.
So Graham's saying not guilty.
Not that I didn't do it.
So Graham very cleverly, Graham is saying that not guilty. The question is how do you plead? I think that Michael, you'll correct the language. How do you plead, right? And the not guilty response isn't I didn't do it. Potentially, this is what Graham is saying. The response is that I am not necessarily guilty of what I'm being charged with in the way I'm being charged with it.
Well, no, it's even more than that. It's not necessarily that I'm not guilty, but that I don't believe there is enough evidence to convict me.
You don't believe there is enough evidence, the correct or enough evidence to convict you. So that's what, but that's not what you're saying. You're saying not guilty.
No, but if there is not, there is not enough evidence
That's off, yeah.
to convict me, then by definition, I'm not guilty.
Problem is.
But you need.
But you did it.
No.
In English law, are not allowed to plead in any other law. A plea that says prove it. If there was a plea that said.
David's saying it's the lotion, it's the language.
Yeah.
David, I think what you're saying is, I think you're both saying the same thing. The lawyers deals in language, but really what you're saying is, you're not saying not guilty, you're saying prove it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there should be that plea. And that would save you from lying.
Right. So there should be the plea that allows you to say those words, which would alleviate any concern that maybe the wording you're using would be misrepresenting the actual truth.
And that's why in Scottish law, there are three possible verdicts. One of them being not guilty.
Not proven. Okay. Okay. Arthur, you've got your hand up. Can't hear you though.
I thought in halacha you're not allowed to incriminate yourself. So in a capital offense, you can't say, I did it.
But we're not dealing with halakha now. We're dealing with
But I'm saying if in halacha you can't say, I did it, surely the same applies in English law.
I think you're yeah. It's a language thing. That's what we're going for. We're going for a language thing. That's a different point. I'm saying, are you allowed to say seemingly misleading or a lie in order to get your point across? That's which is different from whether you admit it or not admit it. Does that make sense?
So in other words, in halacha, you just keep silent and you don't say whether you did it or didn't do it. Whereas in English law, you have to say, I'm not guilty, I didn't do it.
Well, actually, thank you for that. Michael, I'm pretty sure you told me you can just say nothing, and therefore the assumption is you plead not guilty. I'm pretty sure you told me that.
It's not just an assumption, and it does happen quite regularly. A defendant stands completely mute, and the rules are very clear, and a plea of not guilty has to be entered. Prosecution got to prove the case, and everyone's entitled to do that. Now, at the end of the day, that may not benefit you, but remember, the prosecution have to prove the case, and that's why, just one point, often when we talk about people leaving the court without a stain on their record, they've been found innocent. In fact, the real situation is the prosecution haven't proved the case against them, which may or may not be the same thing.
Meaning, I think what you're saying is that you might not be innocent, but you haven't been proved to be guilty.
Yeah, exactly. The word innocent is an interesting word.
Yeah.
The real position is the prosecution haven't proved the case. May well be you're innocent, but that's really the position. And as people have said, we don't have the situation that there is in Scotland, where you can say other things, or in America. But then strange things go on in courts in America in any event.
Michael, do you think the system is correct in terms of the language and how it's done in the way we've been talking about it?
Well, it's very interesting. That it used to be said the golden thread that runs through our system is that the prosecution have got to prove the case. The defendant doesn't have to prove anything. I do think the goalposts are changing. And for example, inferences can be drawn from someone's silence in proper cases when they're interviewed by the police. So I think the goalposts have changed. And I'm one of those people who've often said, well, if you're going to change the goalposts, you're going to move them, then can you tell everyone? But they don't. So it is moving, but the reality, everyone at the moment have to prove the case. And as I said to you, there's no compunction about it. It's quite clear. A lawyer is entitled to say, look, I don't think they've got enough evidence here to prove the case against you. But the lawyer can't mislead the court. You've got to be very careful in questioning then. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much for that, Michael. We really value having you here. So these are some of my offerings and some of the things I've been thinking about. I don't want to keep you here too long. We've been going nearly an hour and I can feel some of your eyes waning. But if there's any questions on anything I've said or anything isn't clear, I'll do a sikum and that, yeah.
Just one question. You went back earlier when you were talking about Schopenhauer saying things and about systems then.
Mm-hmm. We're talking about, he's talking about systems then.
That the language was and the way courts worked then.
Mm-hmm.
And yet now it's, should we say, we're in a slightly more relaxed, more fair system. Why is it then?
It's about the court system today is a more open, fair, inclusive, less corrupt than it was several hundred years ago. Yes.
Why is it then that halacha hasn't changed?
So you one second, change. One second. One second. You said why is therefore halacha not changed? Because halacha is halacha. One second. Halacha is halacha. Meaning, if that still applied, that you were living in a country of a corrupt system. Let's just say we were living. I'm sure there's countries today in the world. Zimbabwe. You're saying, right? I don't know. I haven't lived there, but I'm sure there's systems today where the court systems are not quite as open and honest as we are living in today. And it could be that a lot of these halachot still would apply in those situations. That's why, and I think halacha has, therefore, to argue your point, I think it has developed because there is a halacha of Mesira, but they have clarified it for us to say, yeah, but that's in a case where there's an unjust system. And the system is just and it works, you can pass them over to the non-Jewish system.
But again, so I would suggest that when you're talking about what the original stage is and have you ruled in such a way, and Rashi comes on and says something different. Or Shammai says this and Hillel says that just because they were bullshit with each other.
I'm not quite sure what.
No, what I'm saying is, okay, Shammai and Hillel have their thoughts. They make their rulings and what have you. Then along comes Rashi and changes it slightly.
It doesn't change Hillel and Shammai. Rashi will understand what Hillel. You've got to remember that Rashi is several hundred years after Hillel and Shammai. So he's now trying to understand what the reasoning behind their arguments are, but he's not changing what they're saying.
He's not changing what they're saying. He's interpreting it in his way. They may have meant it in a different way.
Right.
And so all I'm saying is that halacha, as a result, has evolved, developed, changed.
Yes, but only within a certain. So I'm arguing about how halacha has manifested, has changed, has evolved, but only within a system. Meaning, it hasn't changed. It's adapted. It's evolving within the system. That's why we have an oral law. That isn't just a written law. God could have just given us a manual, right? He could have just said, "This is the law, kacha," right? With earthenware vessels and oxen and whatever, with how it was written in the Torah. And instead, what he's done is he's given us a book that's written, which has a lot of the basics of the laws, but there's also a whole oral law out there, which is given us license to every generation, make sure the law applies for this generation within the system.
But that's still.
And the dangers of that, I think this is about the dangers of that is it's open to interpretation.
Right. But what you're saying is that because of generations,
Mm-hmm.
because it adapts, evolves. I use the word change or modernize, but in essence, it's the same thing.
Changes.
Even within the overall system.
Yeah, within the system.
Within the system, but you're making allowances for changes in society or
Within reason.
I'm not saying
It's
not within
Listen, there are many things. It's not our topic now, but there are many things where I have a moral compass, my own Mark Levy living in 2021, thoughts, feelings, understandings of how society, morals, ethics, all that works, and then I have Torah. And there are things that I struggle with today where I think one thing and Torah says no, so I follow Torah because that's what I have to do what it says in the tin.
Alternatively, look out for another opinion that agrees.
You're just not going to let me win this one, are you? Bernard.
If you've got a dispute with your neighbour, say it's a planning dispute.
A planning dispute with your neighbour.
And your local council doesn't agree with you. Are you allowed to then go to the Beis?
Well, one second. I don't understand the case.
You've got a planning dispute.
With another Jew.
With another Jew.
Well, maybe first protocol, you should go to the Beis Din before.
No, but it's a planning matter.
No? Okay.
It's a planning matter. Do you think your neighbor, your Jewish neighbor, has done something incorrectly which affects you?
Yeah, so halacha would have what to say about that, no?
Yeah.
So you should go to Beis Din first.
No, but if the neighbor doesn't want to go to Beis Din.
So, okay, so now, I don't want to challenge you to see if you're listening, so then what do you do? What do you do? You go to the Beis Din, you try, and if he refuses to come, the Beis Din will say, okay, so there will be times that the Beis Din, the Dayanim would say, listen, this is outside of our Daladamas, this is something we can't deal with. Go take, we can't force X, Y, or Z, so you have to take him to court. It's a good question. I don't think enough people, this is present company exclude, that realize that there is a court system that we can use and should use, called the Beis Din. I don't think people enough realize it. And this is again, please God, none of us should have, or very few of us should have matters arising with our fellow brothers and sisters, or we have to, get into disputes, but these things happen. Any questions on Zoom? Next time, consider coming in. only because it's too hard for me to do this. But for the moment, I'm happy to do both. But eventually, I want to move back into person. So we have 8 people here plus me and 14 devices here with a few doubles there. So it's not bad. Thank you for this. The next one is on the 1st, I think it is, 1st of December, so in a couple of weeks. The WOW event's in 2 weeks, that's why we'll do the week after. So a couple more in the ethics series, and I think Viv sent me a couple of also, but if you've got any things that you want me to look into, I'm enjoying this different style of shit, I suppose I should call it. But thank you for your participation, and yeah, hope it was interesting.
Thank you.
Thank